Welcome to our journey through history. Today we find ourselves in the midst of the Korean War, a significant event in the broader context of the Cold War. As the chill of the Cold War settled across the globe, tensions between two superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union, were escalating. This geopolitical chess game found an unlikely battlefield on the Korean peninsula. Korea, a nation with a rich history and culture, found itself divided at the 38th parallel into two distinct entities, North and South Korea. North Korea, with its red banners fluttering, was a communist state supported by the Soviet Union. On the other hand, South Korea, under the Star-Spangled Banner, was a capitalist state backed by the United States. These two halves of a once united nation now stood face to face, reflecting the growing ideological divide of a world caught in the throes of the Cold War. The fuse was lit in June 1950 when North Korea, emboldened by its Soviet ally, launched an offensive against South Korea. This act of aggression was a spark in the tinderbox of international relations, prompting the United Nations to step into the fray. A multinational force, including British troops, was dispatched to the Korean peninsula with a mandate to support South Korea and repel the North Korean advance. In the initial stages, the North Korean forces, riding the wave of their initial offensive, made rapid progress. The South Korean capital of Seoul, a vibrant city with a rich history, soon fell into the hands of the North. With the capture of Seoul, the North Koreans seemed to have gained the upper hand. The stage was set for a fierce and bloody conflict that would leave an indelible mark on the annals of history. As the North Koreans made rapid progress capturing the South Korean capital of Seoul, the stage was set for a fierce and bloody conflict. With Seoul under North Korean control, the United Nations forces, including British forces, were required to act swiftly. The world watched anxiously as the UN assembled a coalition, the 27th Commonwealth Brigade, to counter the North Korean advance that had swiftly captured the South Korean capital. The UN forces, undeterred by the daunting task, launched a successful counterattack. The North Koreans, who had made rapid progress initially, were pushed back. It was a strategic chess game, and the UN had just made a decisive move, but the real game changer was still to come. The UN forces executed a strategic amphibious landing at Incheon, a bold move that took the North Koreans by surprise. This was no ordinary military maneuver, it was a pivotal point in the war, a moment that would tip the balance in favor of the UN forces. By landing at Incheon, the UN forces effectively cut off North Korean communications, disrupting their logistics and command structure. This bold move allowed for a breakout from the Busan bridgehead, breaking the North Korean momentum. The UN forces didn't stop there. They advanced north, pushing back the North Korean forces with determination and resolve. The North Korean capital of Pyongyang, once thought to be impregnable, fell under UN control. The world watched in awe as the UN forces, against all odds, turned the tide of the war. It was a testament to the power of international cooperation, strategic planning, and the indomitable spirit of the human will to defend freedom. With the North Korean capital of Pyongyang under UN control, it seemed like the tide was turning. The UN's counterattack had not only pushed back the North Korean forces, but had also given the world a glimmer of hope. The Korean War was far from over, but for the moment, the UN had shown that it was ready to fight, and more importantly, that it could win. Just as the United Nations forces were gaining momentum, a new player stepped onto the battlefield, the Chinese People's Liberation Army. The month was November in the year 1950. The United Nations forces, fresh from their victorious offensive, were halted in their tracks. This halt was not due to a change of heart or a sudden ceasefire, but was instigated by an unexpected intervention. The Chinese People's Liberation Army had entered the fray. This was not a small-scale operation, but a massive, full-scale intervention. The Chinese forces stepped in with such strength and force that it completely stopped the UN in its tracks. The UN forces, taken by surprise, had no choice but to carry out a fighting retreat across the vast expanse of North Korea. This was not an easy task. The terrain was harsh, and the enemy was relentless. Yet the UN forces, showing their grit and determination, managed to establish a defensive perimeter around the port of Hungnam. But the fight was far from over. The UN forces were now backed into a corner, surrounded by enemy forces. In these dire circumstances, a large-scale evacuation took place. This was no ordinary evacuation. It was a display of strategic planning, resilience, and the unyielding will to survive. Despite the odds stacked against them, the United Nations forces managed to pull off a feat of incredible courage and strategic brilliance. They were able to recapture Seoul, the South Korean capital that had fallen into enemy hands earlier in the war. This was an achievement of monumental proportions, a turning point that marked the beginning of a new phase in the Korean War. Despite the odds, the United Nations forces managed to recapture Seoul, leading the war to a new phase. With Seoul back under United Nations control, the Korean War entered a stalemate phase. This period of the war was marked by static fighting, a term used to describe a situation where neither side makes significant advances. Think of it as a tug of war where both sides are pulling with equal force. The result? A standstill, a stalemate. There were breaks in this stagnation, however. Occasional set-piece operations, meticulously planned and executed military actions, punctuated the otherwise static warfare. These operations were like chess moves, strategic and calculated, each side trying to outwit the other and gain an upper hand. And then, in July 1953, after 3 grueling years of conflict, an armistice was signed. But don't be mistaken, an armistice is not a peace treaty. It's a fancy word for a ceasefire, an agreement to stop the fighting. But it didn't resolve the underlying conflict. Korea remained divided, a line drawn, a scar etched into the landscape separating North from South. Fast forward to the present day, South Korea, with its vibrant pop culture and dynamic economy, has emerged as a successful capitalist country. North Korea, on the other hand, remains shrouded in mystery and continues its existence under a communist regime. Two halves of a whole, yet worlds apart. The Korean War, a 3-year conflict that saw the involvement of major world powers, left a lasting impact on the Korean peninsula. The Korean War, often referred to as the Forgotten War, has shaped the trajectory of the Korean peninsula to this day. Its direct impact, still felt in the stark division between North and South Korea, is a poignant reminder of the enduring consequences of international conflicts. This war wasn't just about the Korean peninsula. It was a manifestation of the larger ideological clash of the Cold War era that rippled across the globe. The importance of remembering and understanding historical events such as the Korean War cannot be overstated. It's not just about recounting battle strategies or tallying casualties. It's about acknowledging the human experiences, the individual narratives, and the differing perspectives surrounding these events. The Korean War wasn't a mere footnote in history. It was a pivotal moment that shaped nations and influenced international relations in the decades that followed. What are your thoughts on the Korean War? Share your views in the comments section below. Remember, history is not just about the past. It's about understanding our present and shaping our future. Until next time, keep exploring history with us.